So the most wild things happen in life, and when you see these opportunities, sometimes you just got to go for it. And so, Frank, we kind of ended up having a little chat yesterday via text and voice message. And I actually, Frank, have only met you maybe one other time.
That's right.
And
you're the mastermind.
Yeah, and this guy does some phenomenal things in the world. And we ended up on this chatting about some things, and it just evolved. And I did a video earlier today about going into the unknown. And as afraid as I was to speak with you and to kind of like share, just because I look up to you. You're a big influencer in this community. He does amazing, amazing things for charities. But either way, the conversation evolved into, boom, do great things. And it evolved into this talk about awakening and this joy and bliss. And Frank has had just the most amazing experience. I'm not really sure how recent, but it's more probably prevalent now and strong. And you shared this beauty with me. And I've gone through something similar, but we've gone two different pathways. And I think it's so crucial and important for people in the world and community to know that there isn't a one size fits all. There's many different avenues and paths to take upon your awakening, or just even becoming the best version of yourself and fully accepting into that. And so I'm feeling so incredibly blessed, so grateful, and fully ecstatic to have you here. Literally, it was like, all right, well, let's just meet up. And the next day, that was yesterday. And then today, here we are. And I just want Frank to share this amazing information of his journey and path on basically your awakening, I would call it. Would you say the same?
Sure. We are the universe awakening to itself.
So where did this all like start and begin?
For sure. So, yeah, let's just go in chronological order. So I grew up in a traditional Christian background, and our family would go to church every Sunday. And then when I went through Scouts, we would also go to church every Sunday after a lot of wilderness survival training, and it was a lot of fun. And I remember my first major experience of what I'll call oneness, and I'll describe these three distinct states that we all kind of go through. And this is only my experience. I'm not here to convert anybody to anything or convince anybody that this is the path. It's simply my experience, my journey. I went through a lot of just normal Christian training, normal upbringings where we would do different Bible studies and different groups. And growing up in Houston, I had the opportunity to do a youth cultural exchange program where we got to go to Buddhist temples and to different types of churches and to Jewish synagogues and to Muslim mosques, where I got to meet Hakeem Olajuwon, and he literally sat down, who was a big Houston Rockets star at the time, and he sat down with me and read me the Quran. And I had all these wonderful experiences, and at 16 years old, I surrendered my heart to Jesus Christ. And I had this profound experience of just love and bliss and liberation, and I had no idea what I was really experiencing. Didn't really have any way to describe it, and so I attributed it to the spiritual, divinity of Jesus, and this Trinity, the Holy Ghost and the Son and the Father that I'd grown up with, and the storybooks that all told me about. And then by the time I had turned 18, I had gone totally the opposite. Full-blown atheism. None of this is real.
No way.
Total rebellion, and that, especially as I dove into philosophy and just started studying all kinds of different just ways of thinking, ways that people would imagine, how did this world come to be? But it wasn't asking the single most important question that I really discovered in 2008. And when I discovered that question, which I'll get to in just a second, I had kind of grown up drinking alcohol a lot. And alcohol was a part of my heritage, basically. My grandfather drank a lot. Both my grandfathers did. Mom drank a lot. Dad drank some. And so there was always a lot of alcohol prevalent from the time I was 13 and then till I turned about 23. And I made a decision when I was 22 that I was going to stop drinking for an entire year. from 23 to 24. And the best decision ever made was midnight. I'm literally in the middle of a beer as the clock goes from 11:59 to midnight, and I'm at a bar hanging out with friends, some fellow Eagle Scouts and other people I'd known through college. And I set the beer down and I go, okay, I'm done for a year. That was the best decision. The worst decision was on midnight of my 24th birthday, picking it back up. But that 12 months of clarity really broke open a lot for me. And around that time, I discovered a book called The Sedona Method and a process called releasing. And what releasing really is it's welcoming and then letting go of what's currently here now. And so the simplest way to describe releasing is almost like I've got a thumb drive here. So if we could imagine this thumb drive as any emotion that we could possibly think of, and you can do this with a pen, you can do this with a cell phone if you have a case, you can do this with a shoe, but you can do this exercise right now actually if you're at home watching or anywhere you are, is to imagine this as any emotion that you're feeling. And that emotion could be anger, could be sadness, it could be joy, could be courage, just any emotion, whatever you're experiencing right now. And then imagine that you could just grip it tightly. I'm not going to grip it too tight.
Please, no.
grip it super tightly. Again, make sure that the object isn't that breakable. But what you'll discover is that this feeling is a little uncomfortable at first, and then it becomes really familiar. And what you discover about whatever emotion you're experiencing right now, and ultimately all emotions, is that you can let them go as simple as you can just turn your hand and open it. And so this process of opening, of letting go, and of welcoming is releasing. And so I went through a lot of that experience. And so I went through a lot of audio trainings, I read the book, wrote down a lot, and my mind is totally clear from alcohol, so that helps out tremendously. And I didn't discover until a long time later like how profound that clarity really was, because on January 1st, 2018, I happily retired from alcohol. Just haven't had a drink since, and it's not a big deal. It's just something that I set down and don't need to pick up again. Not because there's any problem, it's just because I choose not to.
Yeah.
And what I discovered in 2008 was after about 4 to 5 months of daily, consistently asking, like, what's currently here now? Could I let this feeling go? Would I let this feeling go? And then when? And then whatever remains, could I welcome what's here now? And then if I could, then would I? So if I could, I have the ability to. If I would, then I have the willingness. So if I have the ability and the willingness, when would I invite myself to do that? Now's a good time. And you can do that again with anything and everything that you're experiencing, which is enormously helpful in physical training. So barbell lifting, in martial arts, in any kind of experience where you have a really intense physical drive, you're typically going to experience a lot of discomfort and pain. And you also want to be able to separate muscular pain and lactic acid pain and lung pain and your heart pumping from injury pain. They're totally different experiences. So when you're within these confines of simple discomfort, right, just moving outside of that comfort zone into very healthy pain, what you discover is when you're welcoming that feeling of physical pain and then you're letting it go, that the pain becomes sensation that you have simply labeled pain. And it's one thing to hear those words, and it's another to actually have that experience while you're training. And it takes quite a bit of training.
Right.
It's not something that you might be able to hear the first time and immediately pick up and I can go do this. It's just like, again, doing squats or deadlifts or presses or grappling. It's like this is something that you get to practice over and over again. And what you come to find is that the present moment simply reveals itself. It just unveils without needing to intend to get into the present, to experience the power of now. It experiences you, and then it just flows through you, and life begins to flow through you. And in February of 2008, I had an even more profound experience than I had had when I was 16. And it came about right around the time I began discovering the question, who is asking these questions at all? What is experiencing this moment now? Who is this apparently individual person who's writing these questions and answers, who's feeling these emotions, who's experiencing this. And it wasn't until later on that I read a book called Buddha's Brain by a couple of neuroscientists, and they discovered, and they really revealed and laid out, spoiler alert, that there's no individual I within the human brain. There's about 7 different subsystems in the brain. I haven't memorized them all, but 3 of the basic ones I know are like the primal system right around the brainstem, which is kind of like our reptilian brain, the triune brain theory, the midbrain, which is kind of our mammalian brain. A lot of emotions arise from there, and then our prefrontal cortex. So those are 3 of these like 6, 7 kind of subsystems that all create this story of I. I didn't know any of this stuff at the time, but what I discovered and experienced through just direct inquiry and expression was this profound silence in that question, who is the one experiencing this now? And then right around February of 2008, something happened, something broke open, and most people would call it either a satori or an awakening or an enlightening experience, or what I would come to find out many years later, equivalent to a psychedelic experience, like on psilocybin or LSD or different types of healthy psychedelics like that. But I didn't explore anything with psychedelics until
And you
many,
had never
many
done
years later.
psychedelics?
Never.
Okay.
Never touched them. So my first psychedelic experience was sitting in total silence, just asking who is sitting in this total silence, and asking questions like that. And for 3 weeks, from February through March of 2008, the entire world was golden light. And this was from waking to sleep to waking again. And there was this full body bliss and just, and I was laughing all the time, and it was difficult to drive because I was laughing so hard all the time, and just, reality was just, whoa. Oh my God, everything's juicy and beautiful and profound.
You've been like reborn almost,
Yes.
like coming in, but with your adult consciousness,
Exactly.
but as a child in the mind almost. Like no
100%
judgment, no question, just
Nothing.
present. Whoa.
Totally present. And my job at the time is I was a bouncer at a bar. And so it was such a hilarious experience to be this bouncer who was like this smiling, happy guy. And I experienced being the life of the party, alcohol-free. And that's how I experience life now whenever I go out and have social events. Like, I'm usually the most fun guy that I know, and just don't need any external substances to get to that state. And it was really, really fun. And it made my job super easy because the head bouncer at the time, like, he knew my martial arts background and how I competed and all this. And he was like, I was small enough at that time, about this size, and every other bouncer was just this huge, kind of hulking guy. And so I was the happy bouncer. It wasn't my job to, like, big and tough and let me put my cat in, military might and all that. It was just more
Kill him with kindness.
Yeah, literally, kill him with kindness.
I can't fight this guy. Look how nice he is.
Yeah, and I was able to disarm most situations, like just with effortless ease. The only one I couldn't was one night when a group of NFL linebackers came in and they got into a fight with the bar manager. And so the head bouncer jumped in, and then more football players jumped in, and then I attempted to jump in, and I was knocked aside immediately. All 100 and whatever pounds of me just flew away. That was the only experience.
Laughing the whole way down.
Oh my gosh, it was ridiculous. But other than that, I was, 99% of the time just able to disarm situations by just having fun and just by understanding there's no actual difference between you and I. There's no actual separation between you and I. This is an illusion. And then the illusion came back. In Indian terms, they'll sometimes call it Maya. Indian dots, not feathers. And this Maya is this world of illusion that we mostly experience in the state of duality. And so what I began to discover is that, okay, there's these 2 distinct states. There's this duality where I experience, there's this individual me, right? And there's an individual body. And this me is distinct from this phone and this chair and this you who's also an individual body. And that distinction is very, very helpful in most normal situations. Especially in any kind of healthy competitive environment. You know, I use martial arts and powerlifting and sales as kind of examples there. But in any kind of healthy environment, you want those distinctions to be able to create like this hierarchy of winners. And ultimately creating, especially in business, win-win-win situations. That's what we want in martial arts and powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, CrossFit, sales and marketing teams. Like any of that is, we're not creating winners and losers, we're creating winners, winners, winners. You know, we're creating wins all across the board for everybody. And so that's the normal state of duality. And then in 2008, I experienced that state of oneness. And it's very, very simple to discern now, like who's going through that state of oneness, and they are consistently blissful and happy, and they have this, sometimes they'll call it the love of Christ or the love of Allah, or, you know, the divine or the spirit or source, and they'll have all this joy and just bliss, like everything is one. And yet, what I noticed is that most people who have the experience of oneness, they also simultaneously and subconsciously have the experience of two-ness. And it's very subtle. And what I mean by that is, like, if we're all one, then there's still this implication that there is something outside of oneness. There's something outside of us. And this is what causes, in my experience and just what I've studied, and in my questioning and inquiry, this is what causes us to believe that I have an individual soul who has had a past life and who's had all these individual experiences, and that's more of the state of oneness. You know, we experience this like oneness with the divine and with source and with beingness, and it's just like, it's just inviting everything. And I wound up coming across some works of Ramana Maharshi, who is one of the original founders of this self-inquiry, just this questioning, ask yourself, who am I? It's his entire teaching in 5 words. And then there's another gentleman named Nisargadatta Maharaj, maybe mispronouncing it, but he wrote what has been, in my experience, the most profound spiritual work I've ever read, like studied, annotated, written down, listened to on audiobook over and over again, called I Am That. And he has a number of wonderful, profound books. They're all in the public domain, but I Am That is the one I keep coming back to over and over again and keep experiencing just what is. And it wasn't until really last year, it was around Burning Man. So let me retreat and back up just a little bit. So I had that experience in 2008, and then in March of 2008, it went from oneness back to two-ness, like normal duality, normal experience of like human nature. Then I had to discover like what kind of career do I want. Okay, well, I've trained U.S. military officer candidates to become officers for many, many years. Let's go into the fitness profession and let's figure out like how do we take an idea, how do we turn an idea into lead generation, how do we turn that lead generation into sales, how do we turn that sales into a system that we can repeat and optimize over and over again. I didn't understand any of that stuff at the time, but you know, normal business consulting stuff. And then I ended up getting into high-ticket sales around 2012, working very successfully with Fortune 100 companies, and then going into this world of digital marketing consulting around 2014, where we were doing like really small $10,000 to $15,000 deals off of a webinar. You know, one call close webinar. Now they call it a high-ticket closer. Back then we were just consultants, and it was a lot of fun, but what happened from that 2008 until 2018 was I went back to drinking alcohol.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I was just going to ask you. So it seems like you had this kind of connection with God, and you felt this increased amount of joy and bliss, and then you had like the shutting down of the alcohol, and then this connection of oneness, but then it seems like you almost had like a pivot back into the duality. And I was just going to ask, so what was your state during this new business venture? Because it's like, I have a lot of people ask me, well, I can't just go sit and meditate all day and just be in bliss all the time. And so it's like, at what point when you were going into the business, like what was your mental, emotional state?
As I was going into it, the state was just full on duality and questioning of like normal business practices. How do I generate leads? How do I sell? How do I like convince this person that has never met me before? How do I convince them first to part with $100 and then several $100s when I was doing some door-to-door sales, and then several $1,000s when I was doing door-to-door for roofing.
And you had already had that sense of oneness prior to going into this?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Oh, that's even better.
And it's like it was beautiful, absolutely. And what I noticed about alcohol is it would always pull me back down into me, into this duality, in this state of there's a separate me and there's a separate you, and this illusion of what most of us experience is the world. And that's part of what helped me make the ultimate decision, January 1st, 2018, to just happily retire.
Right.
And just to set it down. Just to realize, well, this used to serve me. And that's why I say retirement, not recovery. Because I'm not sick, I was never in rehab, anything like that.
Like that.
I just simply wanted to retire. It was like, cool, this is something I did, now it's not something I do.
Everyone wants to retire, so when you can change the perception of the frame, then it changes everything.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Absolutely.
Well done.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And it's funny because for some people, sobriety or alcohol freedom is hard. And for me, it's very simple. So I'm like, well, every day, like I get another day alcohol free. And I have this app on my phone, and I have another website that counts up from New Year's Day 2018. And so I watch that number go up every day. And so this competitive part of me goes, well, I got to compete with myself. I can't make the number go to zero.
Yeah, exactly. The number's so big right now. I can't go to zero.
I know. It's several hundred days right now. And then it'll get to a day 1,000 and then 2,000, however many thousands of days there. But for me, it's very simple. I know, but for some people, they do struggle with that kind of addiction. My heart goes out to them. I know what it's like to want this substance quite a bit. But that also has to do with gut health. Because something that I also discovered over the years was fasting and the benefits of water fasting, specifically 72-hour water fasts. I don't necessarily recommend them. I'm not a doctor or anything like that. For most of my clients, like my fitness clients, the longest I would ever actually recommend would be a 36-hour water fast, where just take, say, a Friday, eat dinner then, just drink water all day Saturday, and then break your fast Sunday morning. So, or, whatever the days line up to be. And even just having like a 36 was pretty profound. But what I noticed about 3 to 3.5 day fasts is you've depleted the muscles of glycogen, especially if you're like running or sprinting or doing like light weightlifting or things like that. And then you enter into ketosis normally around the 36 to 48 hour mark. Somewhere in there, when you've completely depleted your body of protein, fat, carbohydrates, and then the ketones kick in. And just from a health perspective, I'll describe this and then go back to the spiritual stuff. Just from a health perspective, you definitely want to overeat healthy calories the week before, and you want to overeat healthy calories the week after. And so normally I'll tell people, and I do this myself, overeat like 500 to 1,000 calories for several days before, and whatever you consider healthy. If that's animal protein, plant protein, whatever that is for you and your body and your health, just overeat and overconsume a little bit before, a little bit after, and then just go back to normal eating habits. And by planning for it, it kind of creates this ritual and this routine around I'm preparing my body, like I'm overeating on purpose to prepare my body for this break, and then I'll have this break. And I noticed that there's no struggle because I've planned my body for it, I've planned my mind for it, and then afterwards, like as I'm reintegrating, maybe I'll break it with soup or something really light, and then I'll go back into overeating for a couple days after, and then just go back to normal eating patterns. But what I discovered about fasting is what people have discovered for millennia about fasting is extended fast, and 3 days isn't extended at all, but extended fasting tends to provide some very profound health benefits and just that mental clarity. And what I experienced kind of all throughout that was having this tool now. So it's like, okay, I can tap into almost like clarity on demand. And so now I had these like multiple tools. So I had fasting, I had self-inquiry, I had releasing, I had journaling. So I started like developing more of these tools. And then in 2018, I went to Burning Man for the very first time. And on my first burn, I rediscovered I am that. And so you don't have cell phone service out there. But I downloaded the book, and I downloaded I don't even remember if the audiobook was there at the time, but I discovered the audiobooks later. Just going through that again, it reconnected me with that state of oneness, and then it revealed this experience. I guess we'd call it a state, but it's literally nothing personal, of non-duality. And the experience of duality is as distinct from oneness as the experience of oneness is distinct from the non-dual state. And the non-dual state is this state of the body experiences bliss, but there's no individual I experiencing any of that. There's no individual me to latch onto. And then we start getting into really fun and frequent questions about what is consciousness? What is free will? Who is the one experiencing this free will? And what I've noticed is that the more there is this sense of just release and allowing what is to be. You mentioned earlier, people say, well, I can't just sit and meditate and experience bliss all the time. But you can be active and meditate, having a consistent active meditation in your being, and go be in the world and do whatever is necessary, like whatever your duties or responsibilities are, whatever your, if you believe in like a karmic debt or a karmic load, like whatever that might be, however that plays out, and just allowing that to play as it will. And so what I've come to now is I've got, say, these multiple tools from body work, like transformational body work, specific types of yogic and gymnastic stretches. Definitely experience this with martial arts and with iron lifting. Sometimes gymnastics, most of the time not. It's normally through really intense, dedicated training, that physical training. And of course, like releasing and self-inquiry. So it's all of these tools have come together. And so the consistent experience now is this state of lightness of being, where it starts from the feet and it goes all the way up and goes through the glutes, and it's like your ass is alive in a very interesting way. And then right around the base of the spine, both front and back, there's just this openness all throughout and all up. And then it loops back through itself. And this energy is just consistently there, and there's nothing blocking it. There's nothing resisting it. And if there ever is resistance, then the resistance dissolves by simply asking, who is resisting this now?
Well, yeah, when you, like, going back to, like, you don't have to sit and meditate to be in bliss, or to even just meditate. You don't have to sit. But and this is, like, the teachings of, like, basically Hinduism and Buddhism is this non-duality. And so you guys understand, it's like, when you realize the thoughts and feelings that are coming in are not you, and that you can see them for what they are. It's not that we run away from them. That's actually can have even more negative effects.
Right.
But as you're walking down the street and somebody cuts you off in a car and screams at you, well, there's this split moment that there's a thought, an experience, and a feeling, and then that is projected, and that becomes me, I. It becomes something, and then we throw that out, and that is how we structure our entire selves in our lives. Well, the sense of meditating throughout your day in activities, or just driving, or at your desk, at your office, at work, anything, it's seeing the initial feeling or thought or emotion, seeing it for what it is, saying, oh, hello, how are you? Okay, beautiful, wonderful, knowing that it's not part of you, it's completely separate, and then allowing it to move through and go on. And this is, I feel like, when you were talking about the energy moving through you, it's the fact that you're not attaching to these, well, one, you've cleared out the attachment of these experiences in your life, resentments you maybe have held, bad breakups, relationships, your parents didn't hug you enough, your brother beat the crap out of you.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
And so just to kind of like add one on top of that, it's this separation of well, duality of being attached. You are not the feeling or the emotion, and this clear energy that's moving through. It's not that it's always there, but it's the fact that when there is a feeling or a thought or emotion that arises, this energy is moving so clearly that you can immediately tell that there's not even, I don't want to say like a clog, but there's like a stone or a pebble in the smooth river.
Yes.
And then at that point, it's like, no, moving through. And this is such an amazing, discussion that you're sharing. I really appreciate you sharing this, because this is like some pretty heartfelt stuff, man. But it just goes to show that we don't have to be hung up on all these things, and it doesn't have to be so, like, such a responsible thing to do all the time. Because I feel like a lot of people, even myself, I get super spooked, or used to, on going into any type of spiritual practice.
Sure.
Because when I was younger, I had a spiritual experience with God, and my entire body was on fire. Yeah. And not a bad fire, not like ow, like woo! Yeah. I had never felt anything like that before in my life, and that is what made me know that there was, and again, to whoever believes in whatever, but that there is some sort of divine, powerful energy of some sort 100%. That you can tap into. Right. And then I did the same thing. It scared me. And I went the opposite direction.
Yep.
I picked up more alcohol, and I was like 14, but I grew up with alcohol consumption my entire life. I grew up in a big recreational lake where that's what you did every single day. From the age of 15 years old, it was normal to work your ass off and drink your ass off.
Yes. Work hard, play hard.
Exactly. And the fact that my friends thought it was amazing that I could party till 4 o'clock in the morning, get up at 7 a.m., fueled my fire. I was like, that's right, I can do that. And I would do it more and more. But again, it's this weighing down, this insecurity to feel the actual oneness. Because we're so, and this is the thing that brought me into a very deep, deep state of depression. When I was drinking all the time, I had quit drinking for 6 months. My fiance and I moved to Thailand, and that's when I fell into a deep state of depression. Yeah. So I was actually clear. I hadn't had a sip in 6 months. I was feeling amazing. I'd lost 40 pounds from not drinking.
Totally normal.
Feeling
That's super
phenomenal.
Common,
yeah, totally. Oh, my face went, it was so much swollen from sugar and booze.
Yep.
And
I remember that.
But the thing, though, is that I fell into this deep state of depression in a beautiful island surrounded by beautiful teachers and holistic practices, and I became so very, very, very depressed. And it was just this, I don't know, really interesting moment in my life. And it's because, what I believe it was because of, it's because I couldn't let go of my identity. Yes. I had an identity. Yes. I was this building engineer that worked his ass off, and I partied hard, and I could afford the penthouse apartment and the big King Ranch truck, and I just thought I was like the coolest guy in the world. Honestly, I was very, very happy in that state, and I could never figure out why it is that I became so depressed in Thailand, and to the point where I wanted to run my scooter into a truck. And just, I would have these, it's not that I would sit there with like a gun or a knife, and guys, if you're ever going through something of that severity, please reach out to somebody, because trust me, we've all been there, and things happen. It's okay. You can fight through it. You can fight the good fight.
Absolutely.
But I kept having these thoughts, like it was this demon in my mind that was like, just pull, like driving on my scooter, just pull in front of the truck, just pull in front of the truck. And I'm like, what is this? And I was scared, terrified, because I was thinking that this voice was going to get louder and louder, and eventually it was going to trick me. And then I had lost grasp of my reality, and I didn't want to wake up and be like, oh, I did it. I killed myself. No. But what I come to realize, and what I believe now, and this is why what you're saying like just really, really, really resonates with me so much. Is because we attach to this identity of who we are. And this isn't always who we want to be. It's what we've been socially hypnotized to think that we should. You can't have a good relationship if you don't make good money. a beautiful woman doesn't want to be with a man that doesn't have a BMW. and I was the same way. I had met this beautiful girl, and I was just starting my business, and I worked twice as hard because I wanted to make sure that I kept her locked in.
Yeah.
And I needed to make that money. I needed to be successful. So I was like locking that shit in. And what I later came to realize is it was that I was attached to this identity, and that identity was my happiness. But what came with that identity was also a severe drinking problem, aggression, so the suppression of emotions.
Definitely.
And it's interesting because I went through a very deep, deep state for me to wake up that I am one of everything and that I can feel this way. And it took the hard route for me to find out. And I feel like you've taken, not on purpose, it's just a natural universal flow of life, a different pathway. And this is what interests me so much. And I actually haven't really visited this topic of duality in quite some time.
Sure.
So the fact when you brought it up, it really awakened me to the fact that I've actually pushed that aside. And now that I've been pushing forth with trying to help people, yes, there's a good sincerity in it. And by all means, it comes from my heart. But how much am I actually diving back into my own duality? Am I really creating a new identity that I'm here to help you? I'm here, I'm, instead of knowing that when I release from these feelings and these thoughts and this identity, that I return back to my true nature, which is a lot of energy and fun and bliss and joy. And through that comes helping and support from not only other people to me, but from me to other people. So this forcing of creation almost can actually stop the whole process. Not stop, it's slow and stunted down.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, so like, so now with that said, like, go deeper onto this whole duality, because now you have actually, oh my goodness, so this is how it goes full circle. So I'm actually living in the middle of what you are just explaining, that you went back into the duality and went into the business after having this awakening or this spiritual experience, and which I have had, but now I'm going back in, and a lot of things are coming up. And luckily, through a lot of training and self-inquiry, I'm watching it happen. But maybe there's a reason that you have been put in front of my life just recently. And so it's amazing, guys, when you actually just like take a leap of faith and say, hey, we should meet up, or hey, we should do something. I'm actually having a very big, powerful realization just in this open conversation. So, wow, this is freaking cool, as is life. So, okay, so now continue on with like how you went through this business and the whole going back to the duality of it.
Yeah. Well, we'll just go straight to the duality of it. With self comes fear. No self, no fear. So all of the fear that we experience is not personal fear. It's simply fear. And I discovered back in 2007, 2008, when I first picked up that Sedona Method book, this original scale of human consciousness. And the scale of human consciousness was originally created and discovered by a man named Lester Levinson back in the 1960s. He taught many, many people this scale of consciousness, and it ultimately ended up becoming very popularized by a gentleman named David Hawkins, who he taught this scale to. David Hawkins published a book called Power versus Force quite a while back, and David expanded on the scale. And I originally experienced this scale that goes from fear to love, or force to power, or from shame to quote-unquote enlightenment. I used to experience it as he had written it out as a hierarchy. And so one of the, we won't call it a mistake, but one of the, I would say, less accurate depictions of the scale of human consciousness is that it's a hierarchy that goes down and then it goes up. And that's the way it's normally depicted. And what I discovered is that if I live life as if it's this hierarchy, and I used to love hierarchies, right? Like in jiu-jitsu, you have a white belt who's untrained, and a blue belt who's a novice, and a purple belt who's a journeyman, and a brown belt who's an expert, and a black belt who's a master. And by the way, all human skills follow that progression: untrained, novice, journeyman, expert, master. And the definition of mastery is, of course, that you can create people from untrained up to those levels. And you can train people up to those levels. And so what I noticed across all of this was, if I experienced this as a hierarchy, that it caused, or maybe not caused, more accurately, that there was also an experience of fear. But as soon as the hierarchy just turned to a spectrum, all of that fear went away.
Whoa.
So instead of thinking, well, shame is at the bottom and infinite non-dual loving awareness is at the top, instead of experiencing like that, just going, well, these are just colors on a rainbow. And so I wouldn't look at the color red and think, well, the color red is wrong, the color red is horrible. I would just look and I would go, oh, that's the color red. Well, that's the experience of shame, or of guilt, or of anger, otherwise known as passion or aggression, and then up to pride, which pride is the highest form of fear. And then as we move into this experience of love, that's when we discover courage and non-attachment and joy, and
empathy,
ultimately just pure isness, non-dual nature. And moving that scale of consciousness from its top down or bottom up to just this left right, like literally looking at it like a rainbow, broke open so much. And then I really discovered in business that it was far more powerful to be collaborative instead of competitive. Like, there's normal, healthy, competitive environments, especially in sales offices, but if you're like an entrepreneur or a solopreneur, you'll find much more love and appreciation and wealth in your business when you collaborate, instead of attempting to go, well, how do I compete with everybody else in the marketplace? You go, well, how do I either create or produce or enjoy myself within platforms or masterminds or experiences that allow multiples of us to come together?
And seriously take that in stride, because I spent the last few months trying to differentiate myself from everyone else, and my business struggled. It struggled. I'm not even kidding. And just recently, I had this absolute 100% realization that, one, it's not that much fun to do it by yourself, and two, it is so much more difficult. And it's like trying to push a watermelon through a garden hose. It just it just doesn't, it can be done, but it is not easy. And as soon as I started to collaborate and open up that channel, instead of, like you said, hierarchy, more of an even keel and just seeing them for what they are, all of a sudden the most amazing things started happening. And well, here's a perfect example. Well, anyway, go on. Yes, amazing.
Yes, that's been just my ultimate experience and everyday experience now, is when there is the experience of fear, and that fear again can show up as high or as spectrumed as pride, and then as low or opposite spectrumed as shame. And the ultimate shame is what causes a lot of people to want to kill themselves. And I'm going to say this very carefully, and I invite you to listen to all of this before thinking about one specific sentence of this. It is perfectly acceptable to kill oneself, provided you do not kill the body while you're killing oneself. So keep the body alive, but if you're experiencing this deep, dark depression, or for anybody who's experiencing a lot of shame or guilt from their past, which they believe is carried forward to their present and is their current experience of who they are now, I would just invite you to love, to forgive, to appreciate all of what you are for who you are. It's not, in my experience, that there's a divine grace. It is a self with a capital S grace. That there is always, in every moment, this chance, this ability, this willingness, if you allow it to, and release that fear, that resistance, that me, is to look at that individual self. And if you are experiencing that deep, dark depression, just to go, well, what if I simply set aside this me? And I'll say the word set aside instead of the word kill.
Or maybe retire?
Retire.
I love how you use that. Yeah.
And you can retire that sense of self and just go, okay, I'm just going to set this aside for a bit. Almost like it's a character that I can create. Actually, I'll let you and your audience in on one of the most profound self with a lowercase s mindset tricks or hacks I ever discovered. And I had one of my clients last year say, Frank, this exact trick is worth 15 grand. And he gave it this specific dollar amount. So I was like, okay, cool. And the trick is, most people, when they're voicing like their identity, when they're co-creating or consciously creating their identity, who they want to be, like, I am an aware, athletic, abundant, appreciating, incandescent, influential, strategic, aligning, disciplined, free, legendary, like whatever, these words that you want to create and envision yourself as, is experience it 4 ways. First, experience it in the first person, so saying I, and like I, as if that me exists and is real, and then experience it as you. So voice all the same qualities, all the same values, all the same visualizations and imaginary experiences you're creating for your identity, but say the words you, and then experience it as Frank Eric Cimrhanzel is. So your full name is, almost like you're writing a character in a novel. And then release all of those. So 4 distinct states, 4 distinct mindset shifts there to move beyond the mind. Is the 3 states of mind, like this first person, I am, second person, you are, third person, Frank is, and then fourth is releasing all of that. Who is actually creating all of these? And then the more that me is set aside, so it's embraced and then set aside, and embraced and then set aside, and embraced, and so that going back and forth, it loosens up that stuckness feeling. And what I've discovered, and what people have helped through this process have discovered, is that you don't get stuck in any individual state, is that me begins to flow. And instead of experiencing, today I'm a me, and today it's duality, or no, today it's non-duality, and I'm just going to experience life as all of what is, or no, I'm going to shift back into oneness, and it's all bliss, and it's all joy. Instead of attempting to hook onto one of those, just allow that energy to flow. And even when fear arises, understanding that the fear response is actually a me response, but that the body can always effectively respond to threats without the necessity of fear arising. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're walking along the street and you're having an amazing active meditation, there's still a subconscious awareness that if you step into the street and a car's coming, subconscious mind sees the car, and then you back away from that car. The threat response is activated, but you take a step forward, see the car coming, take a step back, return to safety of the physical form. And then there's just this clarity of, fear never needed to arise. There wasn't this feeling of, oh my gosh, like, what if I had stepped out in that street, and what if it had hit me, and what if I had broken bones, and is my health insurance going to cover, and what's my deductible, and what hospital would I have had to go to, and all of that falls away. All of that is the fear response that comes up from the me. And so when that me falls away, there's simply just this normal, healthy physical threat response of cars coming, body moves out of the way, okay, now active meditation returns in whatever way you experience it.
Well, yeah, and think about, wow, that is such a cool way to look at it, because as soon as the fear, not only so there's a physical response,
yes,
but then there was, what you were relaying is the mental response after that. What if I would have gotten hit? Yeah. What if this, my deductible, all of these things. And this is the sensory overload that comes into the frontal cortex that overloads the brain.
Yeah.
And now this is how we end up with chronic frustration, basically, is because you're not allowing this energy to flow. Mm-hmm. You're over absorbing all of this information that is actually not a part, or doesn't need to be a part, of the information coming in. And if we're overloading the brain with content that doesn't actually apply to the situation, then the brain, the body, all the nervous system, everything's working 5 times as hard as it needs to. And this is how we get stuck into depressions, and we have outlashes of frustration or anger and all of that, because what we've done is we've attached sadness to tears.
Yep.
And anger to aggression.
Yeah.
And I've had to change my words because I face a lot of fears over the last year.
Sure.
And what I found is that the more I talked about fear, which I like to express a lot,
right,
but I was still training my brain and my subconscious mind to to attach to fear.
Yes.
And so I changed it to go get it. Because I know every time I face a fear, there's a beautiful reward on the other side. So I tried changing the word so that I could reprogram the fact that I've attached, basically I've created duality. I've attached that to fear becomes this physical feeling and then a mental process that follows it. And that process is lengthening me getting to my end goal. And so it's a waste of time. It really, really is. So this is so interesting. So basically you're saying that by allowing the response to happen, because that's how we're wired, and that is, it's there to protect us.
Yes.
But we have gone too deep into the processing of what that is, that has allowed us to have clogs in our flow of energy and into our emotional state, into accessing this either oneness or just the present moment and moving forward into this flow. So now you're throwing 5 rocks into the river instead of just allowing it to keep flowing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it also goes to this sense of, actually the question of why. And so what I've noticed and experienced is that when we're in the state of duality, is that there's this sense of what. We're not really focused on why, we're just focused on what, or maybe focused on how. And then as we move into oneness, we begin to focus on why. Like, why are we here? Why does the universe exist? Why did this event happen? And then you move into this state beyond why. So we certainly want to start with why, as certain leadership development programs will tell us, but we start with why so that we can move beyond why. And when we move beyond why, we discover that we're no longer swimming in the sea of opinion, where we're constantly thinking, well, this is good, and this is bad, and this is right, and this is wrong. And we simply move this energy and this consciousness to a state of what is possible in this moment. And then we can shift between, instead of the sea of opinion, rising to the sky of possibilities, where we can fly and kind of see things from a top-down perspective, and then it allows us to move more effectively in the land of action. And probably the simplest way to describe this is when we're imagining all of our opinions about things, like this is the way it should be, this is the way it must be, it's almost like we're at the speed of a scuba diver. We're at the speed of a normal human who just swims in the ocean. And when we're in this sky of possibility, we're like, well, what is possible in this moment? I don't know. Well, what do we want to produce? What do we want to create? Not for a reason why, but and if you are still in that state of, well, I must attach things to a why, then simply shift the why to who, because who is always the most important why. I discovered this in high ticket sales many years ago, moving like $10,000 to $100,000 plus deals, is that if I ask somebody's why, like what is your why, what is your purpose, why do you ultimately want to do this? You want the thing. Okay, well, why do you want the thing? Well, I want it because I want a bigger castle or a house. Every coach wants a castle. And thousands of entrepreneurs I've spoken to and interviewed over the years in different high ticket sales environments. Or I want the car, or I want the vacation. Then what will happen is at the end of that sales conversation or that consulting conversation or whatever that happens to be, is fear will hold them back. Oh, I can't afford this. Oh, I got to talk with somebody else and run away. I can't make my own decisions. I don't have my own authority. Oh, it's not the right time. Oh, I need to think about it. Oh, I'm fine. Which is the 5 objections of high ticket sales: money, authority, time, trust, ego. However, when we focus the conversation on who is this all going to impact? So this is the situation that you're in right now, and I'll just use fitness as a great example. So you're currently 40 pounds overweight and you've been drinking alcohol for many years. Well, what's going to happen if you continue eating food that is not healthy for you and you continue drinking alcohol that you want to quit but you haven't been able to on your own for whatever reason? Consciousness. And then shifting into that state of pride where it's like, this is me, and I'm so proud of you, and I'm so proud of my family, I'm so proud of my tribe, I'm proud of you all. And then shifting over, again, not shifting up, as most people experience. So when you're in that state of oneness, there's still this sense of hierarchy that I've noticed. And it's really in that non-duality experience or state that it shifts over into that spectrum. Then you shift into the spectrum of courage, where I've set aside the personal me. This is what I was referring to earlier about soldiers and Marines, and of course, like Navy SEALs or special operators. I'm not attempting to leave somebody out who is engaging in frontline combat. But the point being is that the reason why they experience that courage is that they've set aside that personal me for their brothers and sisters, for their country, for their family.
Oh, so that's on like an external dual layer.
Yeah.
But if you can look that inward
Yes.
on yours, then that helps separate when you can kind of
Absolutely.
reference it from another point of view.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I experienced that to a far less violent and less lethal and less serious degree in Texas football, where coaches would yell, like, sacrifice that body, go charge into them. And I was about 120, 125 pounds at the time, so I didn't do so well, like charging into people and having my body be able to move theirs at that time. But there was still that notion of sacrifice your body for the team. Sacrifice, this current experience of pain and discomfort so that you can win the game, so that you can score more points. We see this a lot in very aggressive high-ticket sales environments, and I'm talking like boiler rooms, where sales professionals are working 60, 70, and I don't even know how, 80 hours a week, which has got to be 7 days a week. But they're in these really aggressive environments, and they're taking on this well, I'm sacrificing my time and sacrificing energy so that I can get to this whatever it is that they're aiming for, so that I can become the champion of the office, so that I can take that vacation, so that I can provide a better life for my family. But honestly, the most successful car salesmen, the most successful fitness professionals, most successful financial consultants, they're oftentimes not merely doing it for themselves or their individual family or tribe. They're really doing it for their greater community and for the world. And I've just seen that so profoundly. So as we shift from that state of duality, where it's all about me, oneness, where it's all about us, but then there's still this unconscious, almost implicit, very subtle, it's extraordinarily subtle. There's still this egoic notion of, if we are all one, then there is a two outside of us in this oneness. And of course, we could use that military example or any kind of team sport example again, of we are all on the same team, but there's a them. So we are all one, but they are somehow bad or wrong, and we need to compete against them. And again, there's nothing wrong with healthy competition. It's not that it's good or bad or any of that. It simply is what it is. And then there's that shifting of perspective into, well, if there is, and it's not something to take on as a belief, it's just something to take on as a potential perspective. It's well, what if there's no individual me? What if there is actually all energy happens to equal all mass times the speed of light squared, as the most famous physics equation taught us from good old Einstein? What if there's no actual separation outside of the illusion of such, which we learned from basic high school chemistry when we looked at protons and neutrons, and then we saw valence electrons. We were like, oh wait, these electrons aren't existing in points in time, they're just an energetic field, and then it's the magnetic push and pull of those atoms and ultimately becoming molecules, ultimately becoming cells and living things, that causes this appearance of separation, which is why it's valence electrons ultimately that are preventing me from just going through here the same way I can go through the air. And I'm not a physicist, I'm not a chemist, so there's a scientist out there who knows this way better. This may not be exactly accurate, but it's the direct experience, the simplest metaphor. So that's just been phenomenally profound, to live life that way and to still play with duality, to still play with oneness. So I still play with duality anytime I step onto a ring or a mat or an arena and shake hands with a sparring partner, an opponent, whether we have gloves or not, or whatever that happens to be. We got black belts in between us and we go to war, we go to town, whether it's grappling or striking. There's still absolutely a sense of duality. If I wrap my hands around a barbell, there's still that sense of duality of this weight is going to be moved. This iron, this barbell, kettlebell, dumbbell. And so it becomes not a sense of, well, duality is wrong and non-duality is right. It's more of, what do we allow ourselves to play with? Are we playing with this energy of duality where there is that separate me-ness? And I still absolutely, there's still this enjoyment of experiencing that duality, experiencing that me-ness. especially in grappling and in lifting. And then that experience of oneness, where it's like, oh, we're all on the same team. Hey, cool. You know, we're all in this. We're all in it to win it. We're all in it together. And then that state of an experience of non-duality, of everything is. There's no direct controller. There's no actual me here. And just play. And then all of a reality becomes this fun play, this dance.
Man, because we take life way too seriously. And that's the other thing too. It's like being able to go back into that duality, that sense of identity, is, in my opinion, when it comes from like conscious awareness,
yes.
when you're aware of it,
then
it's actually building strength to go back into this oneness, into this non-separation.
Mm-hmm.
And I find myself, through my journey of kind of rising, that I will not self-sabotage, because I have gone through a lot of work myself, not self-sabotaging. I went through a long period of time in my life, and not till just recently have I been able to let go of the self-sabotage.
Yeah.
But I will remind myself of why it is that I don't do things. Whether that's duality, whether that is going into a tough situation, or because just because you've learned it once doesn't mean it's always necessarily fully ingrained.
Absolutely.
And so
100% accurate.
I love that you're saying this, because guys, it's not so cut and dry. It's not like you get there and then you sit on your perch. No, it's like you enter back in and you gain more strength. And
Absolutely.
Not only that, but it's also fun. It's also fun. It's not like you go swim in a pool and you enjoy it and then you never go swimming in it again. No, you got to go enjoy that again and play around and tune yourself in. And that's the other thing, is there's also not really like, basically the gist of this is that, well, I want you guys to understand that there's different viewpoints on things. So there's different perspectives on things. Because really when it all comes down to it, we're all trying to end up in the same point. Do you want to be miserable? Do you want to hate your life? Do you want to not succeed and be happy and have connection and have love and relationships? We're all really going to the same end destination. At least I hope so. And I hope you don't want to feel miserable. But the thing is that there's other viewpoints and there's other perspectives that can help you get there. And I've never been a big fan of teachers telling me that this is the way to do it. No, you got to do it this way. And that's even when you're going through the journey to try and get there. There's also little side paths. It's like little gravel roads on the sides that you used to pull over in high school and make out with your girlfriend. It's kind of like that, you know? It's like sometimes in this life, you go back to that duality, or you go back to that rough patch, but when you separate the identity and the fact that you're in that patch, then you observe it and see it for what it is, and that builds strength, in my experience. Definitely. To when you decide to actually separate from that, and that's not actually a part of you. That rough patch or that challenge is not necessarily something that you've done or that you have to live through. It's the fact that you allow yourself to sink into that living. And then getting out is much more difficult when you sink yourself into it. But that separation allows you, when you can be really aware of it, of the separation of these different things, that when you go into one, that you can actually come out much easier. Yes. So it's like taking a quick dip in the pool and then hopping back out. And this is...
and the human body will still experience many forms of fear, regardless of training in... or practice of oneness or non-duality. I'll give you a wonderful example. Christmas of 2015, I got the worst call of my life, suddenly and unexpectedly, when my mom had a heart attack and was gone instantly. And I was the last man to have a long conversation with her on Christmas Day, and I was the last man to see her alive. And there was a lot of grief that ended up processing during that time, and a lot of alcohol that went into my system to attempt to mask that grief. And what I had discovered through that journey of grief, of this is normal, and by the way, it's the best of all scenarios, like literally the absolute best. Because mom died on Christmas Day, surrounded by family, surrounded by people who loved her, not working, not estranged anywhere, and we had plenty of time to like handle all affairs, and every child wants to bury their parent. No parent wants to bury their child. So it's like the best of all scenarios that could have possibly happened. And there was still a massive amount of grief, a massive amount of sadness and anger and fear and guilt and just confusion. And so even though I had all of these tools of inquiry and releasing and physical fitness and all these different methods to attempt to process that, the most powerful and aligning process was simply loving what is. And when the tears would come up, just welcome it. And just and what I also discovered in that time was this imperturbable core of awareness. And it doesn't actually have a location, but we'll just give it a location in like the center of the brain. So even when like the body is just racked with grief and you're just sobbing uncontrollably and people around you are like, "You okay?" And you're like, "Nope, not at all." It's just process, like it's simply happening. As that pain or as that fear, as that all of that is processing, is discovering and experiencing that there is this invincible, imperturbable core heart of awareness that is always ever present. It's always there. It's always now. And it is untouched by all of that grief and all of that fear. And then there's this realization of, well, if it's untouched by the fear and the grief and the sadness and everything else it's processing through, is it also untouched by the thought of the personal me? And in my experience, yes. So it's if somebody is going through that miserableness, the most aligning, the most powerful thing that they can really do is to allow that experience to occur as is, without resistance, without remorse, and like we were talking about earlier, instead of running from that pain, like I did with alcohol,
right.
Instead of running from that pain, of facing it head on and just going through that dark night of the soul and understanding this is what it is. Okay.
Wow.
I get it.
This happened to me the other day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was getting slightly triggered, and I had allowed myself to somewhat attach to an identity again.
Sure.
And I was watching it go the opposite way of where I wanted it to go.
Right.
And I tried to reach out to do something positive and collaborate with people so that it would, one, help the community, two, help my business situation. Cool. And this movement that I was doing. And I offended the hell out of somebody.
Yeah.
And they came at me, and I just, so much fear, so much anger, because I thought I was doing something good, and then to find out this person was just absolutely, like, I had really disrespected them in some way, which
sure.
I still don't necessarily agree with, but that's besides the point. But I just started to bawl. And this person and I don't know each other that well, only for a few months. And I just bawled and cried. And what are you doing? What are you doing? And I was like, I'm crying. and I said, I have to go. Yeah. I have to go. And this person was beside themselves. They had never seen anything like it before. And I walked in the next day and was like, hey, how are you?
Yeah.
How's it going? They're like,
processed.
what the fuck is wrong with you? Are you okay? And I was like, I'm fine. And I was like, you have to understand is when these things come up, I spent my whole life suppressing things, and I did it through alcohol and drugs. So I have a lot of shit deep inside of here because I did it for so long. Yep. And I have separated from the fact that it's a bad thing to have those feelings.
Yeah.
So I just let them come, and I bawled for 10 minutes, and then I left and cried even more on the beach, and then I felt amazing. And I just allowed it to happen. But that person was so like, what the hell just happened to you? And for me, it was completely normal and natural because I don't run away from these things anymore. But again, we're told in our younger age, buck up, tugboat,
yep.
Buck up. Be a man about it, or don't show your weakness.
Right.
And that was something so surprising that person had never seen, but they'd also never been put, I don't think, in front of somebody that was so open with their emotions. Mm-hmm. And not that I go and cry in public.
I do.
There is
absolutely do. No shame. Yeah. No self, no fear.
But the words that were said triggered, and I wasn't expecting this. But as it was happening, I realized, I didn't, I guess, realize that there was something deep down, and I needed to process it. And so instead of me being driven by fear, by, no, I don't want her to see this, or no, I'm in public, I separated from my identity completely and just said, all right, are you guys ready for this? Not that I said that, but it was like, I looked around and was like, no! And the thing is that I actually reached ecstatic states of bliss the next day. Actually, even into that night, after I had fully processed it. So the more that I do this, not that I force an emotion, but I let the flow of emotion and I don't attach to it,
no resistance.
Then what I find is that my default setting rises every time I do.
100%.
And I become more in tune, I become more happy, I become more accepting into my feelings and emotions, I become less fearful of being judged by people that see me bawl in public, and when push comes to shove, I have to go to bed, my last resting bed with myself. So why should I be fearful? Why should I care what people think about me? So there you go.
100%. Yeah, and it's fascinating how we choose to run from those emotions. You know, how we want to hide from them, because so many of us were trained growing up to either suppress them or to hide them, or to, really only in private to show those. And to really limit who we show those to. And, something I've discovered is that in that state of duality, we oftentimes run from our emotions or run from the world, especially through drugs, with alcohol being the most common drug that most people take and that I used to take to suppress that. And then once the shift occurs into that state of oneness, there's this desire to run away from the same emotions through seated meditation, through inactivity, through, well, I'm on a cushion, or I'm, just lying down, I'm not physically doing anything, I'm not engaging. This is why so many people who experience oneness for the first time, they want to run to a foreign state or a foreign country. They want to get away from, the space that they originally grew up in, or the space that they're so familiar with and comfortable with. Because even though there's the experience of oneness, there's also, again, that subtle simultaneous experience of, well, there's definitely something wrong with what is, or something wrong with the world. But if I go to a foreign country, or if I go to the jungle, or if I go, and take this certain psychedelic trip, or if I go escape some other way, some other how, then, well, I've left behind that state of duality. So awesome. And then the non-duality brings it back to that integrated state of, well, there is no escape, because there's nothing and no one to escape from, and there's nowhere and no one to escape to.
Yeah, that hits close home to me, because I did. Now, it's not that we were running away, it was we wanted to go discover something.
Right.
But coming back, I received very divine guidance from my mother that passed away three and a half years ago.
Yeah.
She said, your growth on the island is finished, you need to go back to America. And I was like, oh, come on, like, this is so nice, I could live like this forever.
Yeah.
But I needed to face another form of growth within myself, and putting myself into that uncomfortable position, and not just sitting on a cushion and a mat.
Right.
I wanted deeper growth, I wanted deeper understanding, and I personally, I'm going to put this out in the ether, and I hope I don't regret it, but I won't. I enjoy living through experience, because life is about experiencing.
Yes.
And as much as it's been challenging, and so many times coming back to America, and I've questioned my intuition. That's the thing I go back to. And so I went back to duality. Yeah. I went, Stephen, this was your fault. You read it wrong. You read it wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, son of a gun. But that's the thing, is like, then what happened recently, just in the last few weeks, I went, no. This is some sort of ego that's coming in, because I'm not getting things in the time frame that I expected. So I had put this kind of label and timestamp on it. And as soon as I took a step back and said, what am I supposed to learn in this? There's something to learn in every situation, and there's a sense of growth in every single situation.
Yes.
And me going into the unknown and into these dark places, what am I learning from this? So, okay, if this doesn't work out the way I expected, or if this shifted and now it's this way and I didn't expect that. Okay, well, me attaching to this outcome that I was going to come here and do a certain one thing, that was kind of the wrong mindset in itself. It was coming in way too hot. And two, as soon as I accepted that, there was something for me to learn and grow through this experience. And that if I'm going to learn and grow through that, then what is the point in suffering during it? And so I might as well fucking enjoy the hell out of it while I'm doing it. As soon as I embodied that realization, everything just started to line up. And I don't know if it lined up or I just stopped trying so hard. But again, it's like pushing that watermelon through a garden hose. These expectations and these timestamps and these belief systems, instead of trusting that things will flow to me because I have energy flowing out of me. And those two magnetic attractions, the atoms and the molecules and the entire neuroscience basically, is that I will attract the things into my life because I am projecting out the energy that is me. And I'm not obstructing that flow.
Yes. Love that.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I love what you were talking about, intuition and really discovering, trusting yourself. And having this profound sense of, well, I can trust myself. And then again, as we're shifting from that state of duality, so a lot of people experience in duality, well, I can trust myself. I am the only one I can trust. And then we move into oneness, and that shift is normally expressed as, well, I trust the divine. I trust God with my individual self. And then the state of non-duality is trust exists because there's nothing and no one to distrust.
Yeah. Can you say that again?
Sure.
Please do.
Yeah. So in the state of duality, there is the kind of the highest sense of trust is I trust myself. I take extreme ownership. I am the ultimate responsibility. And once again, there's nothing right or wrong about any of these. That is an extraordinarily useful frame of reality, extraordinarily useful perspective for really gaining control of your life if you feel that life is out of control. Is you going, you know what? I trust me. I trust myself. And then we shift into the state of oneness where we go, well, I trust the divine. I trust God, whatever my word or incarnation of that is. I trust this seemingly outside source with this personal me. And so I surrender my individual me, myself, to this divine source, and now I trust that divine source. And then when we shift into the experience and state of non-duality, now there's this realization and understanding, oh, there was nothing and no one to distrust in the first place. So how could there be trust? Because how could there be distrust?
Son of a gun, man. This is like, okay, we have to end it on that. That is amazing. That is amazing. And the cool thing too, though, is I love that you snuck in there and said there isn't a wrong on this. Because actually, if you think about it, that's actually in my download that's coming in right now, I guess, is it's actually part of the process. So to have that, I trust myself. And I've gone into that because I used to be swayed by other people's thoughts and opinions. Sure. And that altered my life, and it felt like it wasn't mine. It was somebody else's. Yeah. So I said, no, I'm going to do this for me. Me, what makes me happy. I am going to do this. But through that, it brought me to this, okay, well, now that feels aggressive, and it feels too lonely. So I want to gain traction back into the sense of connection. And because I had separated, so then that's the divine, that's God. Oh, okay, now I feel warm, I feel connected, I feel spiritually guided, I'm supported. And then there's like, well, but wait a minute, why wasn't I feeling that in the first place? Like, wait, there's nothing to actually fear, there's nothing to distrust there, and then it's all just is. It all just is.
Well, here's something useful, and we can end on this. This will be an extraordinarily useful tip for you. If we're shifting from that state of duality to oneness and discovering how to trust my individual self or how to trust the divine, one of the most aligning tools that I've ever discovered for this is self-muscle testing. And I'll explain what it's not, then I'll explain what it is. What it's not is it's not magic. It doesn't allow you to discern like objective reality or supposed objective reality. So I could not muscle. You can't muscle test to say the temperature outside is 90 degrees, and then check that. It just doesn't work that way. You need a thermometer for that. You can't muscle test like this is going to occur in the future, or this is what's occurred in the past that was outside of my ability to perceive it. What you can do is determine and discern all subjective experience. So I can muscle test, and there's lots of different ways to do it. Simplest way that I've discovered, simplest one to teach, is to simply take 2 fingers and a thumb, 2 fingers and a thumb, put them together, and just pull them apart. And what you'll discover is that when we say statements that our body subconsciously knows is true, that this pull sticks. And when we voice something that our body subconsciously knows is false, like our throat actually knows that it's false, but we may not necessarily have that subtle awareness of our throat energy just yet. And so muscle testing can be very, very powerful. So I might say the example of, I was born with the name Frank. I was born with the name Steve. And then it immediately just weakens. And it's very subtle, but when you pull that apart, it just happens that way. And you can do this with any kind of truth that you know. And I would highly recommend, if you're discovering this for the first time, again, don't attempt to use this to try to see things beyond your normal perception, but you can use it to discover in binary terms, is it this or is it that? Is this a yes or is this a no? You can't use it to ask open-ended questions, but you can absolutely use it to ask close-ended, is it one or the other? And you can also use it to say, what is the most aligning number for me in this situation? And again, it doesn't always mean that the situation is going to turn out the way that you want it to. What it does mean is that it's the truth that your body is subconsciously experiencing. And so one of and remember that the mindset trick that I was talking about earlier, where you go through the first person, second person, third person, what I've discovered is the most aligning way to write out this identity, if you still want to create a self-identity, which is totally awesome to do. I've done it a lot and it's amazing. I've helped clients do it and it's amazing. It's a lot of fun, is to check it in muscle testing. Is this a 10 out of 10 alignment? So if I say, my ultimate purpose in life is to get really rich so I can fly to Vegas and do a ton of cocaine with all kinds of strippers, and it's just not going to work. But if I say, I believe that my ultimate divining purpose is to simply explore reality, to have a lot of fun, to help a lot of people, to make a lot of money, to get into my body as often as possible, and to be a man of service, well, now there's a lot of this strength here. And it allows you to trust your own unbreakable sense of integrity.
So a lot of the clients that I teach, when they're in an altered state of consciousness through different breathing methods that I take them into in deep states of meditation.
Love breath work.
There's this ability to speak to the subconscious.
Yes.
And one thing that I speak to them, their subconscious for them in these moments. I do both. I let them speak to it because that's empowerment. It's not my position. But on the other side, it's that you have everything you need that exists inside of you right now.
100%.
And the fact that your body stores memory and understanding and consciousness, conscious awareness. And that goes to show that these muscle testing, the body stores and it knows. It knows. It's so connected. It's so smart. But it's our separation between trusting in that and the analyzing and analytics on what we think and what we're taught need to be the mathematical equation of our life and reality that separates us from this trust and understanding. But this is a true thing to access the innate wisdom that lies inside of us that we have access to all the time. All the time. These are just little tricks and hacks. I mean, life is actually pretty fucking simple. It really is. And these are the types of little things that, again, don't also, I would assume, don't put everything into it.
Right.
Because that's the other thing too. Now you're attaching to an outcome. You're
experiment with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This can have negative effects if you go too deep in the opposite direction. But I think this is really cool because what you just showed us is, well, body knows. It remembers and it knows. and outside of our primitive brain, the rationalization, everything, exists the truth.
Yes. What more can we say?
Wow.
I love you. I appreciate you.
Gratitude. Frank, thank you so much for like sharing all of this. And I mean, I'm feeling so inspired, and like your energy is radiating off of you, and it's so contagious. And this is the cool thing about when you enter into these states of joy and trust and belief and energy and playfulness, that it radiates from you. So not only do you attract those things into your life, because I don't even know how we got to talking, to tell you the truth.
I don't remember.
I don't either. And so it just goes to show, like, we clearly attracted each other into our lives from the work that we do, and not for other people, but for ourselves, and which in turn goes to other people. But guys, you can access this. And it just goes to show, I mean, between drinking problems, grieving from deaths, drinking problems myself, grieving through deaths, depressions, to happiness, to the whole 9 yards. You guys aren't alone, and you can do this as well. And this is really why I wanted Frank to share his story, is because I want you guys to understand that there's multiple avenues and paths that people go through and can take, but it's all leading to the same thing. And the more that the people like Frank can share these types of experiences, the more that I hope in turn that I can help relay information and message, so you don't have to go through some of the things that him and I went through. And I can't promise that you won't, but if we can make your life a little easier and allow you to bring this awareness to some of the things that we had to go through on the difficult path that took years and years and years to figure out, then I believe I've been a service.
I believe we do great things.
Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you, brother.
I really appreciate it. I love you too.
Thank you.
And guys, enough said. Just check it out. Oh my God, I'm so ecstatic.